I paid the bill, and we went to a dance club that Tracy and I visited sometimes. I'm no Fred Astaire, but Tracy loved going to dances. So one of the first things I did when we had some extra money was take some dance lessons. I quickly learned that sitting on the sidelines and watching your wife dance with other men is not a pleasant experience. Cherry was as light on her feet as she was light on her face. We danced to slow and fast music for about 30 minutes before I needed a break. Cherry looked like she could have continued, but she walked off the floor with me and we found an empty table. I went to the bar, and before I could leave the table, the first vulture swooped down on him. I watched what was happening from the corners of my eyes, trying not to appear too noticeable. I saw Cherry smiling and laughing. The vulture must have been a little funny, but she didn't move away from the table. I was more than pleased. She sucked on her margarita when I handed it to her. Very soon, vulture number 2, a guy of about 25, arrived. He acknowledged my presence, but still turned to Cherry and asked if she wanted to dance. Sorry, Slick, but the lady is with me. I don't really like it when people disrespect me, especially children. I spoke quietly but firmly, keeping a smile on my face. I know there was no smile in my eyes, although obviously the guy knew he was breaking protocol. Sorry, dude. I didn't know you two were a couple, he whined before sneaking away. We finished our drinks and went back to the dance floor, staying there for about 30 minutes. Another guy tried to butt in, but at least he had the sense to ask me first. When I told him no, he took it as normal, extended his hand and said, "You shouldn't blame a person for trying. She is gorgeous." We returned to the table and both drank another glass. Just as we were finishing up, another vulture swooped in and asked my permission to dance with Cherry. I was tired, but decided that if she still wanted to dance, then I would let her go. She shook her head, and I told him the bad news. I took her home, and she invited me to come over for a while. It was only 10:30 p.m., and I agreed. We drank a glass of wine and talked easily for another hour. At that moment, I stood up, and she stood up with me. I didn't know how to end the date, and I must have looked like the proverbial deer in headlights because she giggled, which I really liked. I blushed deeply, and she knew I was in big trouble. "Don't worry, Alex. We're not in a hurry, are we?" She seemed to coo. 2 weeks later, in my bedroom, I broke my 0 streak for 2 years. It wasn't anything wild and crazy because Maddie was sleeping in the next room. But I can't tell you how good it felt to have the relief of a real woman in your arms. I didn't last long, but Cherry seemed okay with it. Although it was not part of the evening's plans, Cherry spent the night in my bed, pressed against my arm and chest. When we both got up for breakfast, she went to my closet and came out wearing a white shirt that covered the essentials, but still looked incredibly sexy. We headed to the kitchen where we were soon joined by Maddie, who let out a squeal when she saw Cherry was still with us. She ran up to her and threw herself into Cherry's arms, almost knocking her over. They hugged tightly, and both seemed genuinely happy to be in each other's arms. It was almost comically affectionate, and I rolled my eyes at the couple. "Pancakes! Pancakes!" they both shouted in unison. "Chocolate chip pancakes!" I shouted back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in permanently, and we became the 21st century version of the Brady Bunch. Even though I was still paying alimony and child support, I was making a decent amount of money, and Cherry worked at an accounting firm and was also making a decent amount of money. Maddie didn't lack for much, although she didn't ask for much. I think when you grow up without a lot, almost everything can feel like a lot. I think it's all relative. And while we may have been a modern version of the Brady Bunch, I think we looked like a modern version of the Odd Couple. In this case, the Odd Trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, and each of us had our own last name. Some of these issues were resolved when I enrolled Maddie in 4th grade in the fall. I listed her name as Maddie Ruiz Rogers. She was with me when I registered her, and her eyes got big when she saw what I wrote. She didn't say anything until we left the school. Then she practically exploded. "I can be Rogers like you? Is it true?" she squealed. "Not exactly legal, at least for a few more years," I replied. "But according to the Rogers rules, you have the right to join the club." I made air quotes when I said Roger's rules, but that didn't stop Maddie at all. She jumped into my arms and started kissing my cheeks. After 30 seconds of celebration, Maddie pulled away and gave me a cold look. I was a little taken aback until she spoke. "When can Cherry become Rogers?" she asked. "You know, this is a very good question. I'll have to think about it seriously." And I thought seriously. In fact, on the anniversary of our first date, I asked Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares while I went to the jeweler after work, where I bought gifts for Tracy. Cherry said she would be home late and would have dinner herself, so I figured I had a couple of hours to find the right ring. It was a little after 6 when I walked out of Jean Horowitz Jewelers, having just designed a custom engagement ring. After ordering pizza for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and me, I drove to my favorite pizzeria in a small shopping center. Just as I was about to get out of the car, I glanced at a small but fashionable eatery located just a few minutes away. And at that moment, my world ended for the second time. My Cherry entered the restaurant, hand in hand with a 40-year-old handsome black guy. She looked lively and very happy. I stared after them, unable to move, or breathe, or think. I don't know how long I sat in the car before I realized that I hadn't been breathing for a while and felt like I was about to pass out. I took a deep breath, then another. Then I decided that I needed to feed Maddie, so I went to the pizza place and placed an order. I drove home in a stupor. I don't remember much about the evening, at least until Cherry got home around 8. She was still animated and seemed to be in great spirits when she walked through the door. "Hello. You'll never guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John snuck into town without telling me, and after I finished work, he invited me to dinner. I thought since you guys are eating pizza, I might as well grab a bite with him." She fell silent when she saw the expression on my face. "Is this the story you came up with?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked startled as the reality of what I said played out in her mind. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza tonight, and you saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought, 'You son of a bitch,'" she yelled at me. I was more than a little surprised. Here I expected guilt and repentance, not attack. This must be some new way of apologizing, I thought to myself. Cherry had never swore at me before, but I was beginning to realize that she might have good reasons. "You don't even trust me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt. I know that I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I told you all about it. I didn't hide anything. And I told you that I would never make that mistake again. I understand that your ex-wife left you with trust issues, but that's your problem with her. Don't you dare treat me so disrespectfully again, or I'll be out of here so fast your head will spin." Mrs. Olivares apparently calmly walked out as Cherry exploded, and I saw Maddie sneak away to her room. I wished that the sofa I was sitting on would swallow me up, but no luck. "You're right," I said quietly. "I allowed the mistrust that Tracy sowed in my head to spread to you. You are a separate entity, and if I can't see that, then it's my fault, and I don't deserve you. I wasn't going to tell her about the ring just yet, but after I screwed up like that, I had to play my best card." She bared her teeth. "If you could kill with a look, I don't think I would be walking the earth anymore. So, I know now is probably not the right time for this, but I need to show you how much I care about you. Give me your left hand." She slowly approached me and extended her hand, palm up. I turned it palm down, placed a piece of paper on her ring finger, and secured it with an elastic band from my shirt pocket. She looked puzzled, to say the least. "What the?" she said, taking the paper off her finger, unfolding it, and starting to read. "You lousy asshole," she squealed. "Seriously?" Cherry then captured my lips with the most passionate kiss I had ever received, including anything Tracy had ever given. When we finished, she called Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look," she said to Maddie, handing her the receipt for the ring. "I'll become Rogers, too." The squealing laughter of a pair of joyful females sounds at a level too high for the males to hear comfortably, but I managed to keep my hearing while they jumped around the room. When they separated, Cherry pressed a button on her mobile phone and exclaimed loudly, "You better come here and meet your future son-in-law." Maddie went and brought Mrs. Oliveira's back, so Cherry could show off her ring, and it was still Christmas morning in the apartment when Cherry's brother showed up. He was as handsome as a man, as Cherry was as a woman. Looking at him again, I couldn't even begin to thank him for the fact that he was her brother and not a boyfriend, as I thought. We shook hands when Cherry introduced us, but then he reached forward and grabbed me in a bear hug. A handshake is for friends, and although I want us to be friends, a hug is for family, he said. And they have to show you that if you hurt her, I will beat the life out of you. Understood? He squeezed his hand a little tighter as he said the last part. I wasn't breathing very well, and I got the point. Yeah, I sort of whispered back to him. Cherry briefly told him what happened before I gave her the ring. He looked at me with mocking surprise and said that he was glad that I was still alive. She looked at you with a laser death stare, didn't she? Asked John. Yes, she killed people with that look. Maddie and Mrs. Oliveira's noted that they were smart enough to leave the room when they saw that look. Then he turned to Maddie, looked her up and down and said, "So this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I have always wanted to have nephews and nieces. I think you'll be a great fit." Maddie smiled shyly, and then her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does this mean I can call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't answer because she was crying. She reached out to Maddie and they stood there in an embrace for a long time, each crying their own tears for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie was 16 before we could legally adopt her. At that time, she could already file for emancipation and go out on her own. But neither Cherry nor I were worried that this would happen. The government only sanctioned what Maddie, Cherry, and I created many years ago. Family is not always about blood and legal documents. And then, out of the blue, I hadn't heard a word from either of my kids since we last met over 6 years ago, so I was more than a little surprised when it was Haley on the other end of the line. I didn't bother looking at the caller ID and simply answered with my usual, "Alex Rogers." "Dad, it's me, Haley," she said quickly. "Please don't hang up." "Relax, baby. I would never hang up on you or your brother. Something happened?" "No, Dad. Everything is fine. Just wonderful. I'm getting married next month, and I would like to invite you to the wedding." I think I was as shocked as anything else. This was my little girl, and yet I was so removed from her life that I didn't even know the man she was going to marry in just a month. It was just after Ethan's 16th birthday that I last had contact with my children. We went to Ethan's favorite restaurant for his birthday. As usual, none of the kids were very talkative, despite my repeated attempts. Finally, right after we ordered dessert, Ethan said, "Dad, I'm already 16, and court-ordered visits are over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to, and we've discussed everything, and we don't want to see you. You abandoned us to preserve your stupid pride. Well, you can take your pride and shove it up your ass." I had to give my son credit. He was a great customer. Although he couldn't look me in the eyes when he talked to me, he never raised his voice. For her part, Haley continued to look from Ethan to me and back again. I breathed in, expecting this to happen one day. It was Tracy's handiwork. Her fingerprints were all over it. I assume you understand what wedding vows are and that your mother not only broke ours but threw them in my face. But she's obviously convinced both of you that I'm the bad guy here, and nothing I say will change your mind. But for me, breaking our wedding vows is not something I can just shrug off like, say, the family car breaking down. It's right in my soul, and even though I knew my leaving would hurt you too, me staying would be even worse because it would crush my soul and make me less than the person I am. Then we wouldn't be the same, and you would realize that when you grew up and lived long enough to see things as they really are. It was your mother's mistake, and she did a good job of shifting the blame onto me. Well, I won't take the blame. If this is what you both want... Dad, Haley said, bringing me back to the present. Don't you want to go? I really want to, Haley baby. You know, I even put money aside for the day when this happens, I answered. You don't have to worry about money, Dad. Bob took care of it. Bob? I asked. I guess. But we're talking about Robert Goldstein III, aren't we? There were notes of irritation in her voice. Then they were replaced by pity. You didn't know then, apparently. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago, after we stopped seeing each other, she said. So this bastard ruined my marriage, ruined my relationship with my kids, ruined me halfway financially, and then married my ex-wife. And all this because of my pride, Haley? Every time my son demands an apology from me, don't be like that, Dad. I'm not inviting you here to cause problems. You won't give me away. You won't sit in front of your family. I just want you to be there, okay? Okay, Haley, on one small condition, that I can bring my family with me. Your family? Yes, even a loser like me has a family, Haley. I have a wonderful wife and we have an amazing daughter. You'll like both of them if you ever spend any time with them. It was Haley's turn to get lost in thought. I never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. Honestly, I didn't want their mother to know. Do you have another child? Does she know about me and Ethan? She asked, almost as if in a trance. Maddie is 16. She is adopted. She and I have been together for 9 years. I almost literally found her on the street. She knows everything about you two. What we once had and what we no longer have. She is cheerful and full of life. She too had a setback and we were there for each other at a very bad time in our lives. Almost like it was scripted. Well then, I'm looking forward to meeting the rest of the family, Haley said, recovering from her shock. The wedding took place on Saturday evening in rather luxurious surroundings, as befits the daughter of a fairly successful lawyer. We must pay tribute to old Bob. He did not skimp on his stepdaughter. The service itself took place in a beautiful old church in the city. The girls and I timed it so that we got there right before the service and sat in the last row. Yes, I noticed old friends and family, but the fact that we arrived right before the service meant that we didn't have to socialize ahead of time. And when Haley and Mark were leading the procession out of the church, I received a kiss in my direction. We arrived at the reception in time enough to grab a table at the back of the room, which honestly wasn't fair to Cherry and Maddie, who had a girls' spa day on Friday and then both bought new dresses. Cherry's was sophisticated and sexy, and Maddie looked 21 when she wore full makeup for the first time. Every father's nightmare. But they both respected my wishes and didn't complain when we sat down after I went into the bar to get a glass of wine for Cherry and me and a Coke for Maddie. As I expected, various friends from earlier times began to stop by the table to say hello and chat as soon as they noticed me. Then Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, arrived. Rhonda started crying as soon as she leaned in to kiss me. William hugged me tighter than when Tracy and I were married. I introduced Cherry and Maddie. Both Rhonda and Bill looked a little awkward, but I figured that was understandable. I'd been married to their daughter for 18 years. Since I didn't have a say or pay for the job, I didn't think it would be right for me to move around and work the crowd, so to speak. So the girls and I mostly stayed at the table when people came up to us. But I'm no fool, and I could see the reaction of many people who knew me that I was with a gorgeous black woman and a Spanish-speaking princess. In particular, the reaction of the wives of former friends. You'd think I'd brought a trophy wife to the party. And just at that moment, Tracy and Bob, our congenial hosts, appeared. Being married to someone for almost 20 years takes you into every nuance of someone's personality. And from the first moment Tracy laid eyes on Cherry, I knew she didn't like her. Maybe Cherry was too black. Maybe. Maybe Cherry was too pretty. More likely. Could Cherry have a flat stomach, great legs, and look 10 years younger than her age? Definitely. Could Cherry, with everything she had, just be with the one wrong guy in the room? Hell yes. With all the things going on in her head about Cherry, Tracy didn't even pay much attention to the fact that this was the first time in 10 years that we had seen each other up close. She almost literally woke up when I walked over and kissed her on the cheek in greeting. Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I had a little trouble moving in these new heels, she apologized. No problem, baby. You look amazing, I lied. Let's go meet my new family. I introduced Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, shook Bob's hand as warmly as I could, introducing him to them as the instrument of my subsequent good fortune. Everyone except Maddie winced when I said this, but my daughter gave me a devious look and squeezed my left elbow. Did I tell you this kid is sharp? We chatted for about 5 minutes, not really saying anything, until Tracy and Bob left, and the bride and her new husband arrived. As Tracy and Bob walked away, Maddie shook her head slightly, indicating that she was no more excited to see them than I was to see them. My second daughter, my fiancée, greeted me much warmer than I expected. She hugged me and began to cry, while my new son-in-law, Cherry and Maddie, stood in silence. I was completely taken aback by this and didn't know what to say when she finally let me go. "Forgive me, Dad, for everything," she wheezed. "I never understood what you were getting at until I repeated my own vow about 2 hours ago." Right as I was saying the oath, I was struck in the face by what you went through when your mother cheated on you and broke the oath. I never understood. I blamed you and your damn pride, just like Ethan. And now I understand completely. You were absolutely right when you acted the way you did, and she was absolutely wrong when she not only acted the way she did, but also blamed you. How can I make up for the pain Ethan and I caused you? There was a lump in my throat the size of a football. I haven't cried since I tore cartilage in my knee playing soccer in 10th grade, but I came damn close, standing here with my family gathered around. How about you first introduce me to this handsome guy you made a vow with, and then do me the honor of dancing?" I replied. "Oh yes, of course," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "You haven't met the man of my dreams yet. Mark Westinghouse, meet your second father-in-law, Alex Rogers, my real father." We shook hands sincerely, and then I did my duty as a father and threatened him with my life if he ever hurt my daughter. I introduced him and Halle, Cherry, and Maddie, and while everyone was introducing themselves, the orchestra started playing. "Dad?" Haley asked, tilting her head towards the dance floor. "I'm completely fascinated," I said, taking her hand. The crowd, which had started to boo louder when Haley greeted me, booed even louder as I led Haley onto the dance floor. I knew that at this point, I was starting to resemble Tracy and Bob, but I had many years to catch up. The band played what I like to call children's music, and although I hated it, I knew how to dance thanks to being married to a goddess who loves to dance. Haley was shocked that her newfound father was such a Renaissance man, and we actually lasted 2 songs. By then, most of the crowd had gathered around the two of us. When the second song ended, Haley gave me another big hug, the crowd cheered, and Cherry and Maddie were waiting for me with bright smiles on their faces. I grabbed their hands and pulled them both down to the floor with me, and the 3 of us did our thing while everyone else joined us. "Well, look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry said in my ear as she came closer. "Who would have thought that marrying off a daughter could be so much fun?" I told her, quickly turning to Maddie. "Well, let's wait a few more years. I'm not sure my heart can handle all this fun." "Turn me on, old man," Maddie smiled back. All 3 of us stayed on the floor for 6 more songs. Then I left my girls, went to the bar for an iced jack, and sat down at my table to rest. As I watched Cherry and Maddie thoroughly enjoying themselves on the dance floor, I didn't notice Tracy come and sit next to me at the table. She touched my shoulder, and I instantly realized whose touch it was. "This should have been our day, not Bob's and mine," Tracy said, leaning close to my ear. "You threw away 18 good years. For what? You obviously didn't love me enough. I didn't turn my head in her direction." "No, you're the one who clearly didn't love me enough to not do it at all. Especially after I told you what would happen if you did it. You didn't love me enough and you didn't respect me enough. But hey, you got Bob in a deal, and he's a pretty good catch, I'd say. And I got Cherry and Maddie, to quote the Rolling Stones. You can't always get what you want, but if you try, sometimes you can find what you need. You were an asshole then, and you're an asshole now. Maybe, but I'm a lucky asshole who didn't lose a minute of sleep because of your bad decision. And no, I wasn't expecting an apology. I'm fine." Ethan came back into my life when he began a serious relationship with a woman several years ago. Loyalty seems to be much easier to understand when you have skin in the game, so to speak. He called me out of the blue and said that we needed to talk, and I invited him to the apartment. He was carrying a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey when I opened the door. "Haley said you really liked this drink, and she decided that I should make you a peace offering," he said as I led him into the apartment. We only spoke briefly at Haley's wedding, and that was on shaky ground at best. That was over 2 years ago, and although Haley and I had made up, Ethan and I, at that point, had not yet made up. So I asked my girlfriend Sasha to be my wife, and it made me think about you and Mom. Haley has been telling me for years that you were the injured party in this matter, not Mom, but I didn't really see it until Sasha and I had the big talk that included our feelings about fidelity. Forgive me, Dad. I was a complete idiot. Now I understand everything. I just didn't want to hate my mom. I never asked you and Haley to choose sides, I replied. I just wanted you to know why I had to leave. Had to leave. Over the next few hours, Ethan and I discussed a lot of things over a bottle of whiskey. Cherry cooked a great dinner for us all as the 4 of us caught up. Ethan ended up sleeping on the living room couch because Cherry wouldn't let him drive her car after he shared a bottle of booze with me. Cherry, Maddie, and I sat at the groom's family table for this wedding, along with pregnant Haley and Mark and our first grandchild, 2-year-old Brent, who sat next to Tracy. At least it allowed Tracy to not feel left out, since she was now on her own, since Bob had kicked her to the curb in favor of a trophy wife about a year ago. The kids kept me up to date on Tracy's affairs with occasional tidbits of news about her. I told them both that it was not wise to be the liaison between Tracy and me. We were adults, and if one of us wanted the other to know something, we could pick up the phone. Maddie flew in for the wedding. She's a freshman at Michigan State University, but she didn't want to miss her older brother's wedding, so I flew her out. She, Ethan, and Haley have developed a strong relationship, so much so that they can joke about her by saying that she is my favorite child. I find it very interesting to watch them together. The argument that nurture trumps nature when it comes to raising children seems to ring true for us because Maddie and I have an unbreakable bond that even Cherry has noted. While I wouldn't want what we experienced in early childhood to happen to anyone else, adversity has brought us a little closer than we otherwise might have been. Adversity also probably helped Cherry and me. We both know that we can never take anything for granted, and we cherish our time together as we figure out our new lives as single parents. I can tell it didn't take Cherry long to realize that an empty nest meant no one in the next room was listening in, and she went all out in the bedroom. Hearing her screams of pleasure just makes me go crazy and want to give her even more pleasure. There are mornings when we both get ready for work, a little stiff and sore, after a wild night of gaming. Once all the usual wedding stuff was completed at the reception, Cherry and I hit the dance floor. Maddie also danced with one of Ethan's groomsmen, but not before Ethan warned them that they shouldn't mess with my father's favorite child, or they'd face hellish retribution. I chuckled when he said that. I returned to the table after half a dozen dances, but Maddie wanted to dance with me, so I stayed for one more. I noticed that Cherry and Tracy had nothing to say to each other, even though they were sitting within speaking distance. "Do you feel the frost coming from that side of the room?" Maddie asked when she was within talking distance. Insightful. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry stood up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. A minute later, I felt a touch on my shoulder. Obviously, we have entered the second round, I thought. "So, are you going to gloat about Bob leaving me?" Tracy asked, leaning towards me. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "I know this might surprise you, but I rarely think about you at all. I don't wish you harm, but I don't care about your life and what happens to it. We had 18 wonderful years, and that was many years ago. I have a new life now, and I don't want to waste time thinking about the past or what could have been." I had been watching the dance floor while we were talking, and now I turned to face Tracy. And then I saw her fear. Fear of going into retirement alone. This was another factor that she apparently didn't take into account all those years ago, because she thought I should back down in the face of her threats to ruin my life in the divorce. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her, but then I realized that she would try to crush my soul if the roles were reversed in this conversation. "You know I was an asshole then, and I'm still an asshole now," I said, getting up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.